So yes, hello and welcome to Cinema Eclectica, your guide to the best of cinema past and present during these lockdown days. I am Graham, and this week I've been joined by Sarah.
Hello.
And Tim.
Hello.
And we had a director's lottery duad last week, and that came out with lucky number 13, which was Buster Keaton, which was quite fortunate, as me, Rob and Sarah had all got fragments, like the Key to Time, listeners, fragments of Eureka's new Buster Keaton box set, which came out a week or two ago.
Happy timing.
Like the Key to Time?
Exactly like the Key to Time, yes.
What kind of obscure reference is that? How many people are going to get that?
Look, sometimes when you do a podcast, you just throw in something for yourself.
Okay, fine.
So yes, I got The Navigator, which was disguised as Lala Ward.
Really?
I'm doubling down on this.
Tripling down, I would think. Yes, fine.
No, I got The Navigator. Rob got Battling Butler, a review of which is up on the website right now. And Sarah got Seven Chances. So we thought,
yeah,
when we came out of our director's lottery with Buster Keaton pick, we thought, why not?
Yep, a happy coincidence.
So before we get started, and I particularly want to do this given my recent experience with The Navigator, but before we get started, should we just talk a little about our relationship with Buster Keaton, which I know has been in all of the tabloids and magazines recently?
Gosh, yeah.
Falling out at nightclubs, yeah.
Well, if anyone could fall out of a nightclub
It
with
would be
grace,
Yeah.
it would be yeah.
Cool.
But yes, Keaton. How was your sort of past with Buster Keaton, Sarah?
I think I don't know whether I've seen maybe two of his films, a couple of his films, and also lots of clips that feature on Clip Show of him standing and a house falling on him and narrowly missing him, or him on a railway car, or doing various bits of physical comedy. I'm a fan of that anyway. I like silent movie era films, but I saw things as a kid like Harold Lloyd and Stan and Laurel and Hardy, but we didn't, for some reason they didn't show much Buster Keaton when I was a kid. I don't know why, because it's genius, but yes, I'm a fan, but I didn't get to see very much of it.
Do you think Buster Keaton's appeal maybe skews, I don't want to say a bit older because it sounds like I'm dismissing Laurel and Hardy as kids stuff, which I'm not, but I think kids get that and Buster Keaton is maybe something a bit different.
There are more mature themes, I would say, yes. Laurel and Hardy is just two men being silly in different situations. Occasionally you have a reference to a wife involved, but not in everything. Mostly it's a man on his own with his buddy getting into scrapes, which I think kids can identify with quite easily.
Yeah. I mean, I was never much of a film watcher as a kid, so I skipped this entirely, and I still find silent comedy a bit of an acquired taste. I find Chaplin very hard work, I must admit.
I can understand why. I think Chaplin, for me, there is a distinct difference between Chaplin, Stan Nolly and Buster Keaton, in that Chaplin, there is a heightened sense of pathos in his films, which I can sort of spill over into mawkishness for my money, but I'm obviously he has a massive fan base, and that, I wouldn't be one to diss him, but yeah, it's not. I don't like him as much as the other Keaton or Stan and Ollie.
I mean, the upshot of all this is that silent comedy is something that I have to actively get into. It's not something that's a comfort watch for me, but I think when I watched The Navigator, something about Keaton really clicked with me.
Good. And what do you think it was?
I think There are two things, both of which I think are present in Seven Chances. The first thing is that although his character is oblivious to things, he is not himself stupid. There is a kind of gracefulness and diffidence to him. It's not pure like Three Stooges stuff.
yeah, it's not that. It's not that basic. I don't think. I think it's a bit more mature than that, like you say.
I think the other thing that makes Keaton's work feel very contemporary is his obsession with the theme of the fail son, or large adult son in our modern parlance. That he tends to play like the adult son of some rich industrialist who is considered a dreadful disappointment by their family.
Right, okay. Excellent.
And I think that's something we can all appreciate now that those people run nearly every country in the world.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
But that's the core of Seven Chances, isn't it? That he
Yeah.
will lose his inheritance unless he finds a bride by a certain time.
Yeah, by that very same day, in fact.
Yes, an extremely,
Yeah.
tight deadline.
And this, I mean, the woman that he's been courting for like years and years, and well, you know, months and months, and they sort of get on very well, and he really likes her, but he completely cocks up the proposal.
Yes.
I can marry anybody, it'll be fine, you know, it doesn't have to be you, it could be anyone. And she's just like, oh, well, I feel special, cheers.
Yeah.
No, it's off.
So that's quite fun, and it's based on a play by a writer I wasn't familiar with, but apparently was successful around the time, called Roy Cooper McGrew, who I think was part of the Trumpton Fire Brigade.
I'm pretty sure that was his other job, yeah.
Yeah. And Keaton hated the play, apparently.
All right.
He considered it kind of maudlin, sappy, a kind of soft-centred farce. Nothing like the sort of death-defying material he tackled in stuff like The Navigator.
Right.
So I think, looking at it, even though he seems to have thoroughly Keatonised it, I think that kind of makes sense. I mean, the material, the kind of stunt-based material that you associate Keaton with isn't really there for much of it.
Yeah, it has a long lead in before he starts being Keatonish, doesn't it? I thought that myself, and I wondered, I think if it's a source material where it is to do with, you know, it's going to be a marriage, it is to do with relationships and love and romance and, you know, the progression of that dynamic. But, you know, to put his stamp on that, I can understand why he rejected it in the first place, because where's room to insert himself? Where can he insert himself in that? If it's somebody who, you know, there's an adventure involving a rail yard, a railway, some railway carriages, then fair enough. If it's like house building or something like a career, or he's placed in a work situation or a building situation or something like that, you can understand exactly where he can insert himself. Something out on the range perhaps, or where there's action, there's like a larger scape. But actually with this, he just transforms what could be quite a domestic story into something quite like, you know, landscape filled by the end of it.
Yeah.
It really involves
it's very
all of the...
outdoorsy.
Yeah. It suddenly goes for something which could be set on one set, basically, or, you know, a couple of sets domestically, and then transforms it. So you have got, like, giant expanses of California, and a huge tree and several boulders and the whole of downtown LA, I think.
Yes. I mean, I will say, even before this happens, I don't think it is, like, offensively stagey. I think by the standards of a film made in 1925, when
Yeah.
film was still trying to get out of the theatre anyway. It looks
Yeah.
fine, you know, it
It
moves
really
along
does.
nicely.
Yeah, because you know
Yeah.
that you've seen lots of black and white films and you think, oh, well, there's the Aspidistra, there's a selection of Victorians. Yes, I know where I am. I'm in early film.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he moves it on quite a lot from that, I think.
Mm-mm. And I think one of the things that I like about, well, most of the early silent comedians, the Marx Brothers, who were just post-silent, had this same ethos, is how absolutely ruthless they were with material that doesn't work. Like a lot of Keaton's films, including this one, are weird lengths. They're somewhere between an hour and a half or 45 minutes. And they're that long because if a bit didn't work, he would just razor it out.
Well, fair enough. I mean, he knew his brand, obviously.
Yeah, apparently that whole big finale that you were talking about, where, as you say, every single woman in LA is chasing after him, and he also has to outrun an avalanche. That was added after test screenings, and it wasn't going well, but there was like one bit that had a suggestion of that sort of material in it, and he thought, all right, well, that's the ending. So yeah, people talk smack about test screenings, but when they work, they really work.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, that led to some expansion of the film, which has been very worth it. Maybe they also found it rather sedate in the beginning and were sort of, looking at the watches thinking, well, he's supposed to be this really good mime physical comedian. Where's that going to happen?
Isn't he supposed to have nearly killed himself by now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, whether there's are there any stunts in that? I mean, obviously I'm the control group this week, having not actually seen this. Where does he nearly kill himself in a?
Yeah, I mean, he does
one?
have to sort of leap from one cliff to another cliff. That's an impressive
Yes.
bit. Or I mean, there's a bit which I don't know whether it's him or a stunt double. I wouldn't have thought it was a stunt double. It might be a dummy. I don't know. Where he's on a extremely tall tree, which subsequently falls down.
Yes.
And then there's also the whole avalanche bit, which, needs him to avoid giant boulders. However, are they really giant boulders? Probably not. And where exactly? And the way he films it as well, like, from a particular angle, if it's filmed from the side, it looks like he's being chased by all manner of giant stones. But if you looked at it from straight on, would they all be in their particular channels? It's very cleverly done. It's brilliantly choreographed.
Yeah, the reputation he has, as much as I know of it, is sort of that. Well, usually the way to do something that looked incredibly dangerous was just to actually do it. Most of the time. So the thing, jumping aboard the tram, that's one of his, isn't it?
Yes.
And the house
And
falling
of course,
down.
the famous one from Steamboat Bill Jr., where the house wall falls on him, which apparently, I don't know whether this is a legend, but it sounds more plausible than most early Hollywood legends. But when he was going to film that, every single one of the crew walked off because they thought he was going to die.
Oh my goodness me.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. God.
Flipping.
Does rather it kind of raises the question, really, of whether there are dozens or indeed hundreds of other, silent stand-up comedian geniuses who were killed in the course of doing it, who we have therefore not heard of.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible. Maybe that Hindenburg thing was just a big jape that went awry.
It's like that sequence in Singing in the Rain where Gene Kelly starts off his film life as a stuntman and only later turns into a matinee idol. He goes through a series of very dangerous stunts, like walking into a shed that subsequently explodes, being sort of like running and falling off a horse, or being punched over a bar. So you get some idea
And
of the level of... They had no PPE then. They had no health and safety.
And that's part of Keaton's legacy, isn't it? That he's not just beloved and cited as an influence by comedians. He's someone who's a massive influence on action movies as well. Jackie Chan and George Miller are both huge Buster Keaton fans.
Oh yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, Jackie Chan is a legend of putting himself in danger, isn't he? And extraordinary feats of physical prowess.
Yes. So yeah, I enjoyed it. The one sort of thing that brought it down for me was the blackface sequences.
Yeah, that's an obvious stab in the modern sensibility, definitely.
I mean, I tend to cut films that are almost 100 years old a bit of slack in, the progressiveness department. But it's a bit harder to ignore in this case because some of the jokes are, explicitly centred around, hey, that black person's acting strangely, and you just watch it now and you think, yes, they are, because they have a white person covered in boot polish.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just ooh, no, that didn't just happen. Oh dear.
I don't know how much slack to grab them, really. I mean, in a sense, it was the same sort of distasteful act then as it is today. Yeah.
And in another sequence, an African American actor is used. So why not just,
That's a good point. Yeah.
Employ somebody to be a sidekick.
I suppose it could work if you assumed that 1920s America was full of white people who used to walk around in blackface, and that the joke is on their strange behaviour rather than actual black people.
Yeah.
If it's like an anthropological look at the weirdness of blackface performers in the wild, as it were.
Yeah.
I think that's rather generous, to be honest. Yeah.
I think it's also wrong, to be honest.
Yeah,
but yes.
Yeah, obviously.
But does anyone have any recommendations to go with this, since Idiocy has forgotten to do a question of the week?
Well, I think a very logical companion piece would be 1999's The Bachelor, with Chris O'Donnell and Renee Zellweger, which is where this film has, it's a direct copy of that, including the iconic scene of the thousands of women running through the streets in search of a single man in want of a fortune.
Is that going to complement the film or make you think, Jesus Christ, who thought Chris O'Donnell was an adequate replacement for Buster Keaton?
Oh, that poor guy, honestly. Anyway, he still suffers, doesn't he? I think it's just an interesting comparison thing, and the whole trope of you will inherit this giant amount of money if X, Y, Z. Brewster's Millions, for instance, that's another one where he has to he gets the money, but then he has to spend it all in a day. It's all to do with large amounts of money and how the average person would handle a different situation. So that could be an interesting comparison.
Yeah, it's quite a durable plot point in that regard.
Yeah.
I kept coming back to the oddness and the not unpleasant oddness of seeing Keaton as a romantic hero first and foremost. I mean, a lot of his movies have romantic subplots, but it's rarely as front and centre as this.
Yeah.
And I thought about that other movie where a comedian who does not normally do straight-up romance movies has just dropped in, and the weirdness of that happening is actually deliberate, which would be Paul Thomas Anderson's Punch Drunk Love.
Right, I've not seen it.
Oh, yeah.
So you remember that for years this was the one good Adam Sandler performance people could name until the Safdie brothers thoughtfully gave us a second one after about 20 years.
I'm sorry, but I really liked The Wedding Singer. I thought that was a great Adam Sandler film.
I haven't seen many of the films that are named among the dregs of his work, so I have a more forgiving standpoint on him than most people. But I think in Punch Drunk Love, his screen persona is used in a really interesting way that actually gets you to see this standard kind of temperamental Adam Sandler character as something with a kind of soulfulness to it. And I think, like Seven Chances, it moulds the romantic comedy genre to its hero's persona in a way that I think is really interesting and rewarding.
Did you check out one of the extras on the DVD? On the Blu-ray, rather?
I did not. What was it?
Well, interestingly, What No Spinach.
Right.
Which is an accompanying short film that has a very, very similar plot, but a less engaging romantic hero. And it's just basically the same plot, but it contains epic lines like, "Don't you look like a hunk of ham that lost its eggs?" And
Is that a compliment? Okay. Can anyone tell?
It's an excellent 1930s, 20s dialogue. I love that stuff.
Authentic jazz age nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Dylan Horrocks, a cartoonist from New Zealand, and you're listening to The Geek Show.
So if you're enjoying what you're listening to, you can donate to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where we will soon have exclusive episodes up for Patreon backers. You can find our website at thegeekshow.co.uk. We're on Twitter at TGS_The Geek Show, and you can find us on Facebook just by searching for The Geek Show.
It's an impossible mission to talk about video games without upsetting someone, so join us at The Geek Show as we lean right into that. On Impossible Mission, we take 2 YouTube episodes and mush them into one seamless whole, on which we talk about happenings from the world of video games or something we just find cool. Formerly known as Press X, and born in you as Impossible Mission, join us as part of the Geek Show Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts from.
So yeah, if you do go on The Geek Show, you'll find exclusive written reviews of films that we may not cover on the show, although some we do, but we'll get to that. We've got Alex Payne's latest Classic Film Kid column, this time on Alfred Hitchcock's legendary Psycho.
Oh, cool.
And we have the aforementioned review by Rob of Battling Butler, the third part of Eureka's Buster Keaton box set. And we've also got a review by Mark Cunliffe of a Canadian film called Dreamland, of which more now.
Yeah, I've been watching this, and it's a movie by the director Bruce McDonald, who his most famous work that people might have heard of is Pontypool, which was from what game? About 10 years ago, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, which was a very odd kind of horror movie, although it was vaguely a zombie film, but not quite.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And 10 years later, we get something that's kind of a companion piece to it, or it looks a bit that way anyway, which is a kind of, I don't know what you call it, a neo-noir sort of drama thriller set in some strange, unspecified Central European republic.
Yes.
And it's got quite an appropriate title. I mean, we'll get into that in a minute, but it's very much a kind of dreamlike, sort of strange, I don't know, fantasy might be a rather strong word for it, but in addition to having a kind of Hitman-related kind of plot where there's really quite a lot of murders take place in it, but it also has kind of drifting in and out of reality a little bit. So it kind of occasionally has kind of scenes that jump forward and backwards in time. There's kind of dream sequences, kind of hallucinations happen in it.
Yeah.
And it's the plot of it essentially is it follows a kind of unnamed hitman who works for some sort of evil, like really kind of like child sex trafficking organization. It's pretty grim. And the movie kind of opens with him already carrying out lots of kind of nice, clean murders for this kind of evil gangsters, really.
Yeah.
And then he kind of, really at the start of the movie, starts to kind of realise that his boss is pretty much just selling kids to wealthy paedophiles. And so he starts having kind of moral qualms about that.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, it sort of seemed to me like he should have drawn the line some way before then.
Yes.
But, yeah. So it's in this kind of unspecified city, which has a very large palace, which seems to be run by this mysterious kind of really just completely mad, evil countess played by Juliette Lewis.
Oh, wow. Good casting for a mad countess.
Yes.
Yeah, although to tell you the truth, good though she is, she doesn't really have terribly much to do. She's quite a kind of secondary character in it, but she's someone who figures quite importantly in the setting, which is that she gets mentioned a lot as kind of in the background, but doesn't have that many major scenes herself, really. But anyway, she more or less what happens with our hitman main character, who's played by Stephen McHattie, who was one of the main characters in Pontypool as well. People will remember, but he's playing this sort of master assassin kind of guy, the very sort of slick professional hitman.
Yeah.
And he gets given the mission by his boss to go and not actually kill, but kind of intimidate this mysterious master trumpet player character, who is someone who is sort of lined up to play at the Countess's party at the palace. And so you kind of follow these two guys in parallel, the master trumpet player and the assassin, as a kind of like a vague sort of parody suggesting that, the hitman's kind of skill is the equivalent in some way from this trumpet maestro. The only thing being that actually they're both played by Stephen McHattie, so they're both kind of two sides of the same character.
Yes.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it seemed at first, it took me a little while, it took me one or two scenes to actually realise that they were different people. Which is possibly just me not paying attention, but it does have this. I mean, then this is where it starts to get strange. I mean, this quality that there's two of them is kind of acknowledged by other characters. So there's another character who says, yeah, the strange thing about the maestro is he can be in two places at once.
Right.
And it's like, what does that mean in the context of the movie? And obviously it just never gets kind of gone into any further. But this guy, evidently in some respect can be in two places at once, and nobody really kind of digs into it. But so they are two distinctly different people because they meet, numerous times in the film, and there's the issue of whether the hitman is actually being sent to kill the trumpet player. But I kind of, like I was saying about this guy's job and whether he should have realised sooner just how, horrendous what he was actually being sent to do was. I kind of tend to think hitman is one of those kind of roles in a movie that, I don't know what annoys me a bit exactly, but makes me kind of slightly dread that, this character is going to start out as a master assassin who's killing people left, right, and centre. He commits like a quadruple murder right at the start of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like with a hitman, it's something where, are you then expecting that something will go wrong and we're meant to sort of accept this squeaky clean sort of murderer as the status quo and then get shocked by the changes?
Yeah.
So it's the kind of thing where sometimes it seems occasionally to get taken for granted, even in really, really good movies. But I don't know. It's also one of those things where, usually someone in Act 1 will get killed to establish how amazingly professional our hitman main character is.
Yeah.
So it kind of felt like one of those things where there ought to be, I was thinking we ought to build a memorial somewhere for all these people who get killed in Act 1 of, hitman movies. There ought to be a sort of, an unnamed victim, like a sort of random small-time drug dealer in Leon or something like that. But, yeah.
The Tomb of the Unknown Drug Dealer.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe not that good an idea. But it's kind of got these two characters, the hitman and the trumpet player, and it suggests that there's some role of the kind of death of one or both of them representing them losing identity or even sort of gaining it in some way, like killing off one of them is a sort of purification of who he is, which is something that, that one or both of them have some problem with. But it's all rather kind of vague, to be honest. I wasn't sure how to interpret all of that. But it kind of suggests, the other aspect of it is that the trumpet maestro is also a heroin addict. And so there's kind of like comparison drawn between the hitman's gun and the maestro's trumpet and then his syringe. And they're both of the characters are kind of helping out these awful aristocrats who live in the palace of this city. And they're preparing for this wedding where essentially his child's bride is being married off to the countess's brother. And there's kind of a comparison there also with people getting their fingers chopped off by the hitman as a kind of enforcement thing. And the sort of, equivalence with that and the wedding rings of these characters who are just being, this basically like 12-year-old is being forced to put on the wedding ring. And there's a lot of weird kind of symbolic stuff like that, but which is kind of good. It's interesting, but it ends up creating a kind of detached style for it, really, for the movie overall, partly due to the just kind of dreamlike atmosphere. So the main character, the unnamed assassin character, you end up quite sort of detached from him, and you don't find a lot of kind of insight into what his sort of thinking and motivation is. You're left kind of guessing it in some respects. He kind of seems to be having decided not to, to be against his boss and this horrendous kind of child trafficking ring or human trafficking sort of thing. But you don't get much more to it than that, really, except that, the movie takes place across a fairly kind of short period of time, a couple of days or a few days at most.
Yeah.
And he, in the course of this, just kind of switches from being a completely almost kind of like psychotic assassin, really, to the point where he's, sneaking into the palace and raiding this wedding in order to rescue the kids. And he's also just turned against his boss to the point where he's, shot him. I don't want to spoil too much goes away. He doesn't actually kill the boss, but you'll see. But it's it's got another quality which is quite good, which partly is just them picking locations pretty well, but it's quite it's set amongst kind of urban architecture where there's this great big kind of Central European sort of Austro-Hungarian palace in the middle of the city. But most of the city is kind of like post-Soviet-ish urban architecture, kind of big sort of concrete kind of gantries and things like that, and concrete bridges.
Yeah.
And so it makes quite a lot of good use of this in their kind of cinematography. There's a lot of kind of diagonal lines of walkways and that kind of stuff, and long staircases going up and down. It's got a very vague kind of hint of like Christopher Nolan's sort of Inception there, a bit of the kind of psychic architecture sort of stuff. Not a lot, just sort of faintly. But it's also got a nice kind of colour palette as a movie. It starts off at night and has quite a lot of kind of neon tinted, sort of pink and yellow lines and stuff like that in this in the sort of nightclubs it's set in and around. But in addition to the kind of, the main character experiences kind of dreams where it's not clear if he's just sort of hallucinating or whether he's actually just dreaming at night or what. But very occasionally, the movie, with that kind of dream material, tries slightly too hard.
Yeah.
It has kind of things like fisheye lens sort of close-ups of characters' faces, and you also see kind of guilty dreams of victims dripping blood,
Yeah.
And it could have got away with very slightly less of that. I'm not sure what you're supposed to get out of a fisheye lens close-up of a character's face. And in some cases, I didn't see it in this case. And likewise, calling the movie Dreamland seemed very slightly kind of heavy-handed in that respect as well.
On the nose, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And it has kind of lines like that with characters saying, this isn't real, this is a different world, we're in a dream. And I'm sort of like, well, we could probably kind of work that out itself. That quality would have worked anyway.
There's a reason why David Lynch did not call the Razorhead weird place.
Yeah.
I was going to mention David Lynch and ask you if there is a comparison to be made there, Tim.
Oh, well, yeah, I think there is. It definitely has some kind of passing resemblance to a lot of kind of Lynch stuff. It's... I don't think it's as weird as Eraserhead. It's, I was going to make the point of comparing it to Pontypool again. I mean, I don't know whether or not having been a fan of Pontypool would necessarily put you on the same page as Dreamland, if you see what I mean. It's overall kind of less accessible than Pontypool, mainly because Pontypool, although it gets pretty weird, kind of starts much closer to the real world.
Right.
And kind of starts off with Pontypool ends up kind of resembling a zombie film a bit as a kind of point of departure, whereas Dreamland just kind of starts off in a totally different world and stays there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of another sort of point of comparison. Graham, what was the name of that movie from, I don't know when it was, 5 or 10 years ago, that was about like a guy driving around in a limo and kind of assuming different weird roles at night?
Holy Motors.
Holy Motors, yeah. And Holy Motors, as I recall, was also kind of had musical numbers in it, which this doesn't, but...
Yes,
Certainly did. It had a group accordion session.
Yeah. So Holy Motors maybe is something to kind of compare it to, as something very vaguely similar. And again, I think Holy Motors maybe was more was more surreal and kind of went in and out of different kind of realities more.
Yeah.
Dreamland kind of stays in one sort of odd, kind of noirish plot within this setting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the closest comparison. But it's, generally speaking, in a way, Dreamland follows a sort of one-off, pretty coherent story just within this very slightly strange setting in this style. Oh, it's also a vampire film. Did I mention that?
No.
No, you left that out.
Just dropping that in there. Yes, it's sort of a vampire film. It has a real vampire character in it. The Countess's brother is a straight-up, fanged, sort of bald Nosferatu kind of thing.
Awesome.
So he's a weird hissing, tall, kind of black-robed, sinister guy who just kind of prowls up to people and sniffs their neck and that kind of thing. And it's like, is he actually a vampire? It's kind of hard to tell, or is he just someone totally mad?
Is he a very enthusiastic cosplayer?
Yeah, but he does actually drink blood in the film, and other characters, somebody else said, "Oh God, we're dealing with that guy again." This is the one who's a vampire, right? And it's like, do they believe in vampires? They know that really vampires are a real thing in this world, but
I think sort of.
Ironically,
God,
I was just going to say, ironically, I would actually believe it if Juliette Lewis turned up and had a vampire for a brother.
Yes.
Yeah. I was kind of wondering about it, whether you say, well, just having that one vampire character doesn't exactly make it a vampire movie, because the rest of it is just a kind of, a totally different sort of movie. There's not really a lot of that kind of...
Sort of vampire movies are often my favourite kind of vampire movies, like Valerie in her Week of Wonders.
Yeah. And so there's not a lot of kind of gothic sort of stuff in the movie at all, but nevertheless, it's just got pretty much a full-on kind of, vampire just moves in and out of the plot in that way. He's just there as a secondary character. I don't know. I found myself, struggling to sum it up, really. It works a lot of the time. It works quite well, and it's one of those things where, whether you could say it's a really great movie, I don't know exactly. You'd probably come out slightly perplexed by it, the same way I did. You'd enjoy watching it. You'd definitely not regret having seen it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it does have its kind of faults, and it ends very strangely. Well, yeah, it ends very, very strangely. It also has it does have the characteristic of being quite a kind of pulpy sort of hitman thriller story, which is that it has quite a lot of bloodshed in it. There's brutal shootouts. You kind of start with this wedding where a child bride is being married to the vampire, and you hear from the start how they've brought this trumpet player in to play at this wedding, and there's various kind of attempts on his life and failures as well. But also from the very start of the movie, Juliette Lewis's character says, we invited everyone to this wedding. We want to keep the politicians we've invited separate from all the international arms dealers we've invited, and says everyone's bringing their guns, just to make sure everyone's kept safe. And it's like, well, you don't need a much clearer bit of sort of foreshadowing than that, really. Obviously, it ends with a bloodbath, really, of quite spectacular proportions. But yeah, so I don't know what to say beyond that. If you like the sound of all of that, that is Bruce McDonald's Dreamland, which is you can get it now from Bulldog Distribution, and I think it's available via quite a few different streaming sort of services or kind of online rental.
Yeah, I think that's... I don't want to say sold me. I still don't know if I'm going to enjoy it or not, but I'm very curious about that now.
Yeah, I think, like I say, you'll enjoy it definitely up to the point of saying, well, you won't think it's a waste of your time. It's got a lot of very, very strange stuff in it, which isn't usually enough to recommend a film to me.
Yeah. We're going to go for a little Bond break now, because Mark Harrison has reached the end of his Bond retrospective, which means, of course, that it's the Craig years.
Hey, guess what? There's still no time for No Time to Die, but let's wrap up this run and look back at the James Bond series a few years after we left off. The year is 2006, the Queen turns 80 years old, Helen Mirren turns in, an Oscar-winning performance as the Monarch, and with a different spin to working on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Daniel Craig is Ian Fleming's James Bond 007.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
After the critical performance of Die Another Day, producers Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson resolved to go back to Fleming's books, and the only one they hadn't yet adapted for the screen was the very first, Casino Royale. It's well known that during this time, Quentin Tarantino threw his hat into the ring for making a Bond film with Pierce Brosnan after he made Kill Bill Volume 2, but his notion of a hard-bitten black and white period piece set at the time the book was originally written wasn't the new direction that Eon Productions wanted, and as it turned out, neither was a fifth outing with Brosnan. With Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins minting the term reboot some 18 months earlier, Casino Royale is as close to a reboot as the Bond series has yet managed, with the minor exception of Judi Dench's M somehow leaping over the chasm of continuity to see in the beginning of Bond's career. It's stuff like this that leads some to try and explain the casting changes by positing that James Bond is just a codename for several different agents, ignoring the fact that it would be a bit corporate for all of these agents to have the same favourite drink and dead wife. But ironically enough, given the lack of enthusiasm for Tarantino's noir spy flick idea, Casino Royale does open on a similar tack with a striking black and white sequence that focuses on the emotional difficulty of Bond's murderous adventuring right from the off.
How did he die? Your contact? Not well. You needn't worry. The second is... Yes. Considerably.
It's with this film that director Martin Campbell takes on an almost Arthurian status in the franchise with his second entry after GoldenEye, which similarly revived interest in the series after a longer than usual break. He has been called upon before when he's needed, and when he's needed he will turn up again, but Casino Royale is the better of the two films. It's a rollicking, violent, crunchily entertaining spectacle that makes the most of its greater freedom to tear up the rulebook, and it inadvertently casts an inescapable shadow of greatness over the rest of the Daniel Craig Bond films. Still, despite all of the gatekeeping umbrage about Craig's casting when it was first announced, the star already had the makings of Bond all covered between two of his then most recent films, Matthew Vaughn's Layer Cake, where his swagger first put him in the frame for 007, and Steven Spielberg's Munich, on which the actor had met Mossad and British Secret Service agents who had influenced his approach to the character, and so he arrives fully formed in his first outing. This affinity for the part serves him well on the bumpier road ahead. While the Craig era may be remembered for breaking the 2-year cycle on which the series had previously operated, Quantum of Solace was positively rushed by comparison to Casino Royale, arriving in cinemas for a November 2008 release date. This would have shown less if not for the Writers Guild of America strike that led to Craig and director Mark Forster rewriting the script on the fly during production, leading to pre-coital innuendo like this.
I can't find the stationery. You come and help me look.
Whew. Wow. Despite the negative response, Quantum of Solace is quite underrated as a direct sequel that pares down the running time to a lean, mean 106 minutes and represents to date the last known sighting of an actual James Bond film. Where the kinetic and cerebral antics of the Bond films had influenced the initial reboots, the franchise was growing right at the point when cinematic universes were coming along, with adverse effects on the typical standalone storytelling of the series. Unfortunately, MGM went bankrupt in 2010, which led to a longer gap between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. Released in 2012, the 23rd film in the series became something of a 50th anniversary celebration. Additionally, Sam Mendes' film arrived a few months after Craig had shot a special scene with the actual Queen for the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. The film itself is remarkable for holding on to the past with one hand and pointing the way forward with the other. It elegantly shoulders the weight of Britain's diminished global power while also turning one of its most familiar pop culture exports into a billion-dollar worldwide hit. So, why doesn't it pass for a Bond film? Well, we've only just seen Bond get started and this film is already telling us he's past it. A dinosaur and not the fun misogynistic kind from GoldenEye. In fact, by the time he finally reports to M at the end of Skyfall, he's already quit his job 3 times in 3 films. It winds up feeling like the right Bond film at the wrong time in his tenure, and dazzlingly rewatchable as it is. It's like no one notices that his one job in this film is to protect Judi Dench, and, well, you'll remember how that turned out.
So, 007. Lots to be done. Are you ready to get back to work?
With pleasure, M. With pleasure.
3 years later, Spectre, the film that had to follow the billion-dollar Bond. Joining the annals of fourth outings like Die Another Day, Moonraker and Thunderball, Mendes' encore performance opens with Sam Smith's theme song, Writings on the Wall, which could most aptly be described as Adele's Skyfall at 75% speed. The film that follows has that exact same tempo, offering an unforgiving dirge through unbelievable plot twists and retroactive continuity, ending with Bond quitting his job again, so the next film in the series will have to deal with that too. It's a film in which all of the action feels small and Craig is almost the only highlight. That's not always true of the performances in those other franchise low points that I mentioned, so there's no doubting his commitment to the role, which is a shame when an increasingly carnivorous news cycle fills the ever longer gaps in production with speculation about when he's going to leave the part behind. Over time, the gap between Spectre and No Time to Die has expanded from 3 years to 4 and now 5, courtesy of cinemas being closed due to the current crisis. As the Bond of record for the last 14 years, he's been in the role even longer than Roger Moore. To put it in perspective, No Time to Die singer Billie Eilish was only 4 years old when Casino Royale was released in cinemas. In the interim, Daniel Craig has had the opportunity to show much more range in films like Logan Lucky and Knives Out, assuring a long career in character acting beckons after his 5th and final film finally arrives. It's funny that the initial backlash against his casting complained that he wasn't anything like the other Bonds, because that's eventually proven key to his success. It's his main strength in the role. Bringing more nuance than anyone who's ever played the part before, he's superb, whether the films are peaking or troughing at any given moment of their usually overlong runtimes, and it's thanks to his progress that even after he's gone, yes, James Bond will return.
I've got something new from Arrow Video called The Wind. It's a Greek-American cult production by a director called Nikos Mastorakis. And I previously knew Nikos Mastorakis for his 1975 film Island of Death, which is one of the most unpleasant things on the Video Nasties list, albeit unpleasant in a sort of detached way that doesn't make you repulsed so much as just you sort of squint at it and think, who's the target market for this?
Sorry, which movie?
Island of Death, it's called.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it's got, like, everything. Murder, rape, bestiality, incest. Every weird Greek movie has incest in it. It's just, they've never got over Oedipus, I guess.
Oh dear. Okay, yeah, fine. Yeah.
But I think it is a metric of how porous the film industry was back then, that just a couple of years after Island of Death was part of that very lamentably successful obscenity trial that kicked off the Video Nasties era, he was making what looks like a fairly mainstream kind of slasher movie with American financing and a few names in the cast. And I was excited to see The Wind because it has one of those premises that is just so good you can't believe no one's used it before. Is what if we have a slasher movie where the heroine can't leave the house where the killer is because there's a raging hurricane outside.
Wow, okay, yeah.
It's simple.
That seems like a pretty strong hook to me. Yeah.
Simple, but simple but brilliant, I think. I will get ahead of this and say that I don't think it exploits it terribly successfully. I think there's a few outdoor scenes where there is a sense of the kind of danger that nature is bringing down on them, but the geography of it is kind of weird. I can't help but compare it to something like Dario Argento's film Tenebrae, where there's this very famous tracking shot around a whole house because there is about to be a woman confronted by a murderer in there, and Argento wants you to know exactly what room is where and how you can get from one to the other. And
right.
I don't think The Wind needed something that extravagant, but I do remember thinking I'd like a bit of a clearer sense of where the characters are in relation to each other. And I also don't think it really helps that the killer is played by Wings Hauser in a performance that is really kind of second-hand Jack Nicholson stuff. I mean, it genuinely is like Mastorakis showed him The Shining and said, just that, do that.
Right.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Does this have a historical setting? Is it set in a sort of 19th century or something?
It would be much better if it was, but no, it
right.
isn't. It does have a kind of
Why do I think it was?
I don't know. It does have a kind of interesting setting in that it's set on the Greek island of Monemvasia, and before the hurricane gets underway, when it's using its exteriors, it does show you that, as with Island of Death, Masterakis is very, very good at finding out-of-the-way Greek locations that look kind of dreamlike and weird. There's a few notable credits on it. The music is co-composed by a very young Hans Zimmer.
Oh, really?
Just back when he was mainly known, of course, for the theme tune to Going for Gold.
Right, yeah.
Anyone remember it for a quick blast of it? If we wouldn't get sued for copyright.
It is apparently very musicologically complex theme tune for Going for Gold. It was definitely the thing that made Christopher Nolan sit up and think, yeah, that's my guy. It's not a bad score, although it is used slightly oddly, rather like the hurricane itself and the accompanying wind noise. You'd expect it to be used a lot more heavily than it is. And as a result, at the end, when it goes into full-on sort of Cod John Carpenter synth suspense overload, it's nice, but you sort of think, that's a bit of a gear shift.
Right.
A few interesting people in the cast, though. The lead character, the sort of final girl character, is played by Meg Foster, who, in a remarkable coincidence that I definitely didn't plan out, used to be married to Stephen McCarthy.
Oh,
right.
Really? Spooky.
It's weird how these little theme weeks come up when you least expect them.
Yes.
She's rather good. She has a fun character, Sian Anderson, who's like... I mean, she's meant to be a thriller novelist, but a lot of the sort of detail of what she writes reminded me of a kind of Jackie Cooper bonkbuster novelist, and I've got to admit that sounded a lot better. I would absolutely watch a film where Jackie Cooper is chased by a crazed serial killer. There's also Steve Rails back in the supporting cast, and I think this is, along with Toby Hooper's Life Force, this is one of precisely two films I've seen where there is a psycho on the loose, and it isn't Steve Rails back.
Yeah.
That very rarely happens. I think my favourite performance is Robert Morley, a veteran British actor who...
Oh, really?
Yeah, did 1001 Things, probably best known in horror terms for his role as the critic with the annoying yappy dogs in the absolutely peerless Vincent Price vehicle Theatre of Blood.
Oh, right. Theatre of Blood, yeah.
Yeah, he plays...
He very often plays a figure of like an MP or an official or a Lord of the Manor or somebody like that.
He's a kind of big, rotund fellow with a camp manner, and he goes about 1,000 miles over the top as Sian's landlord. I mean, it isn't the sort of performance that I think the film can adequately contain. It is madly out of step with everything else, and it's great. I really enjoyed it. I think it's the right kind of mad, jarring performance to throw in there.
Can we do Theatre of Blood or Life Force on the show?
We have done Life Force before, but Theatre of Blood, I think, is... Yeah, I don't think you were there for that week, but it was one of our very early directors' lotteries. It's mad, isn't it?
Oh, right, okay. Yes, I don't know how long ago that was. It might be too soon to do it a second time.
I think that there may still be co-hosts going through counselling for doing Life Force the first time round.
Well, you can put Theatre of Blood on the maybe list. I don't know. We'll see.
I'd love to have an excuse to do Theatre of Blood. Yeah, it's hilarious.
I'll try and find some excuse or other. You know, like it's.
maybe
Vincent Price's wedding anniversary or something like that. Try and come up with this. We'll try and invent a tenuous excuse. Anyway, sorry. Back to The Wind.
But back to The Wind, yeah. The guy who I am really fascinated with is Masterakis himself, who I did a bit of research for this. I don't know what extras are on the disc because we got an online promotional screener, but if they do not have a biographical feature for Nico Masterakis, Arrow have missed the boat in a way that is very unlike them. Because he started off as a TV journalist. His first big hit was when he was just in his early 20s, and he managed to infiltrate Aristotle Onassis' yacht with a camera concealed in a guitar. And
wow.
Okay.
He got some footage there, but was then kicked out by Ted Kennedy's security detail. He was a TV host for a while and a radio host for a while, but that he lost that career when he was displeased the then ruling junta of Greece. He was banned, and I swear to God this is a quote, for speaking freely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's it.
Well, we can't have that.
The evil.
So yeah, then he went on, and his first film was Island of Death, which I think is a crazy thing to start your career with. But
yeah, what prompts that? My God. Okay, yeah.
I can sort of understand that film a bit better, knowing that he had already had brushes with censors.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, maybe. Is he still around, Masterakis? He's not still making movies, is he?
Yeah, I think he hasn't made something for a bit. His last credited film on Letterboxd is something that I am afraid to tell you is called .com for Murder.
.com for Murder?
Yes. Like,
right.
Like Dial M for Murder, but immediately dated, I think was the pitch. But
why is it called .com for Murder? Why isn't it called murder.com? That would actually have aged slightly better.
Yes.
Oh, well.
He does, however, his Wikipedia entry does say that in 1995 he launched his own classic rock radio station. So if you've ever wanted to hear the hits of the Eagles played by the man who made Island of Death...
yeah.
There you go. So that's The Wind, and I do think it doesn't utilise its killer premise particularly well, but it's a diverting enough film, it looks handsome enough, and like I say, it just has this crazy backstory, and if you're a connoisseur of slasher films with crazy backstories, and I know a few of our listeners are, then that's out on Arrow Video now.
Splendid.
So, next week we are going to do something that I think is long overdue, really. We're going to have a streaming roundup. There's already been an avalanche of new titles on streaming thanks to the cinemas shutting down because of COVID-19, and we're going to review every single one of them. We're not going to review every single one of them, but we're going to do as many as we can. Okay.
We could just do that as a sort of, Hail of Bullets sort of episode. You just read out a title, we give it a rating out 5, do as many as we can in an hour.
Yes.
The highest possible density film reviewing.
Yes.
No, probably not.
So entertaining, not.
Yeah.
We can't be the best film review podcast, but we are determined to be the most film review podcast.
Also, although we can be the best, I mean, we are also the best. Let's
We
not
are
kid
also
ourselves
the
there.
best, yeah. It's 2 for 1, dear.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, still finalising what we're going to do in that week. I think there's a strong possibility of Vivarium, that Jesse Eisenberg trip-out science fiction movie that's been making waves. I'd like to do Circus of Books, a Netflix documentary about a nice old couple who became proprietor of a gay pawn shop by mistake.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to do Vivarium. I don't know if I'll be on next week.
Like I say, we're still finalising it, so if you've got a window open, we might be able to manage that.
Okay.
But as I say, you'll find out next week what we're doing. Until then, that's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica. I've been Graham.
I've been Tim.
And I've been Sarah.
See you next week.